Yes.
Okay,
Per kilowatt hour.
we're live, by the way. Justin's supposed to join us, right?
Yeah.
And those numbers I pumped out included land, just as an FYI.
So I saw you had some conversations with Mr. Paulson about Norwich.
Yeah, there's a little exchange. Did he copy on his answer?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, basically, he said they've been pretty busy with the budget stuff, but he did say that, I mean, his speculation, which is the same as, we were speculating, is that Paulson, there must be some deal, some part of the agreement with Convergent that, somehow he has to deliver the pilot. We don't know if it's got, because it's just strange that we're hearing from him, not from the company itself.
Yeah.
And actually, I sent Dave Norbutt a note last night, late yesterday, when he just kind of asked us, Dave, where is the company here? We're hearing from you, but why aren't we hearing it from the company? So he hasn't answered that yet. But so I don't. I mean, we can actually. I don't think there's anything we can do retroactively to incentivize it, but they might be able to do something directly through the taxing jurisdictions. I did. Dave Paulson talked to the school district that 487 was out, but they could always opt in and back out if they want. I'm not sure if their position might be different now with this educational contribution they were going to get. So.
Do we want to get started, or are we waiting for the attorney?
Jennings said he couldn't make it. Right?
Did he say he couldn't make it?
No.
John won't be on.
Oh,
John will.
John.
Yeah. Well, let's see if I have it.
He said he couldn't make it.
John Jennings said he couldn't make it. Yeah, we were wondering about Justin. I thought was going to join us. So. You may be just running behind. Well, we if we can start talking. Let's see. One thing, if you want to start talking about fees, so our fee. I mean, when I was looking at this recently, and was looking at a bunch of them probably about a year or so ago. I didn't find anything that were 2%. For a fee. Well,
Can I record?
oh yeah, he must.
Oh, have we started the meeting?
Start without the order.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
So yes, we'll start the meeting.
Okay. All right. So I did look around a year ago to look at different other industrial agency websites and even recently, and most of them were around 1%. Some were 1.25%. I think I did find one that was 1.5%. So 2% we are pretty high. Some of them do charge an annual administrative fee, though, like Wyoming County. I think they charge a fee is based on like if it's up to $1 million project, it's $500 annually. If it's between 1 and 10 million, it's $1,000. If it's over $1 million, it's $2,500 annual fee. So we do have a higher fee, but we're not charging the annual administrative fee. Wyoming County, they're also a 1% fee, and I think it's $1,000 annual administrative fee, something like that. So, they're kind of all over the board in terms of the actual annual fee and they don't all necessarily charge an annual fee, but the ones that do, it ranges. So, Justin signing on now. So we'll Justin's hopping in there. So
I kind of have mixed emotions on the fees. They're coming, they know what our fees are when they come to us.
Right.
They have the application, we lay out our fees, and they've made the decision that even with that fee structure, they're coming this way.
Yeah.
So now to lower it after we've required the others to pay those fees, if we do something, maybe it should only be on the utility scale size ones.
Good morning, sorry I'm late.
That's right. We're just starting to talk about kind of some of the fees. I was explaining how, when I've been looking around a while back, a lot of the agencies, I may have found one that was 1.5%, but that a lot of them are like 1 or 1.25%, typically. And Paul was just saying that, they do know what our fees are when they come forward, but.
Have we done any sort of an average comparison? If we were to lower the initial fee and then charge an annual
No,
on an average project? Might be more beneficial to us in the long run.
Yeah, there is a good point on past practice. The folks that have gone through as clients paying 2%, and then if there's a graduated or lowered scale going forward, there's a difficulty to balance the disparity there. But perhaps the inclusion of a going forward annual fee would balance that out to a certain degree if you were to temper the upfront fee. Because you'll have a suite of clients. I don't know if there's 30 or 50 or what the active project list is right now, but those in the system right now won't be asked to charge or pay an administrative fee on an annual basis for maintenance. But if you institute that fee now going forward, there may be a balancing act there. If you look at the average life of a transaction, if it's 15 years and you're charging $1,500 a year, there's some revenue there that you'd see long term, but perhaps lowering it up front will balance that out.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, it'd be 1,500 for 10 years, it'd be 15,000. So I guess
Well, we had you put together like some sort of an agenda or at least suggestions. The first one was IDA, UTEP, and procedural issues in light of the state's new valuation method. So I guess that means, do we want to stay with a per megawatt, or we want to do it a different way?
I guess with the state's new valuation, it works out to being, does it end up working out to being a per megawatt fee that we end up charging under the value, and then we use that per megawatt?
It comes up with what the full value should be, right, Paul? Or what?
Comes up with what you can put on the assessment roll as full value. Doesn't mean we can't charge negotiate a per megawatt fee.
Right.
But
Or the other option is
do an assessment-based pilot.
right, where you do a percentage abatement, like we do with our other projects.
It gives you two options without, the problem in the past were a lot of assessors, and if you were listening to the webinars, asking about why can't we use cost? And I've never been a fan of cost because it's clear that they cost a lot more than what the revenue, either a discounted cash flow or an income approach to value generate, okay? So at least now you have a statutory mechanism on how assessors have to appraise these, so it should take a lot of the concern out of Article 7 or certiorari reviews of assessments if they follow and adhere to the law. So you may see some people going to an assessment-based arrangement with these pilots.
I think the industry is going to continue to want certainty, and the fixed dollar per megawatt structure is something that has been instituted and kind of understood as a standard. The new assessment regime, if you will, in the short term, it as you point out, is going to have taking the IDA and exemptions out of it. It's going to have a couple of impacts on local tax rolls. First of all, they're not going to be assessed at a cost structure with, $1 million a megawatt type thing. It may end up being half of that. Some assessors in the state have been going to $2 million a megawatt. I mean, it's just crazy. But as they temper that, and it comes down to the discounted cash structure, those assets are going to sit on the rolls, whether exempt or taxable, at a much lower amount because of the discount formula. It will temper the amount of special district charges, even if it is exempt. So there won't be as many as the colloquial, gold-plated fire trucks out there, if you will. And with respect to the IDA structures, and there's going to be a secondary impact of the very small community-based solars, megawatt and less. I think as they analyze what the likely assessed value will be, it won't be necessary or beneficial for them to really go through the IDA, or even try to pursue a 487 pilot if they can absorb what will be a much tempered assessed value. For the IDA's purposes, as you look forward into how that assessment regime is going to be absorbed into the county, your cost benefit analysis is really going to be what will, and the resultant pilot benefits will be the thing that is tempered. The developers are going to still want your per megawatt pilot structure, whether it's inverted or not. But what is going to occur as you analyze the potential savings at the public hearing level is that you're going to see, instead of what I've seen, statewide, at about an average of 75% abatement throughout the term of the pilot, they may end up paying about 20 to 25% of actual taxes. That resultant abatement at the end of the day is going to be much lower because the assessment will be much lower. So as we analyze the potential savings, that'll be affected. And it'll make your pilots look a lot less generous, which I think in some ways might be a good extrapolation long term. But they're still going to want the certainty of the fixed dollar amount, the certainty of payment over the life of the pilot, at least with the improvement side of things. And this is some of the subject matter that I may suggest going into executive perhaps, but there's always variables on these projects. Even if there is a pilot in place, they should be paying full taxes on an assessed land value, and they should be paying full special district charges, which again is tied to the full assessed value of the improvements. So there's variables there that they can look at the pilot schedule that you have historically viewed as what the pilot is, but there are unknown variables that travel with that, being the land tax and special district charges. Some developers overlook that. It comes as a little bit of a surprise, but that's something that you really can't control under the pilot itself. So I think generally, just to sum it up, the new assessment regime is going to generally impact what your pilot analysis will be at the hearing level and what the long-term savings may actually be because of the lower rateable.
Well, there's no question it's lower. I'm looking at the Oya projects, Dave.
Yeah.
They're currently assessed for 2021 at $6.8 million. Using the 2% community credit that Bill gave me, that's going to lower that assessment to about $2 million, a little over 2, using the new calculator. So it's going to be a shocker for the towns when they start looking at what that's going to generate for a new assessment.
What, you said 2.5 or just 2 million?
Oh, just a second. Now, it all depends whether the 2 cents is the accurate number. Using 2 cents as a community credit and all the other appropriate inputs, it's about 2.06 million. Exact number, 2,063,000 roughly. So even if it goes up from there another million, it's still a significant reduction in what's on the assessment roll for 2021. So there'll probably be a little shock value to the towns on what they may lose in their special district assessments this year for 2022. It's the only one we can look at because it's the only one that's been finished and actually assessed.
You know, one metric or one part of this new law that I'm not 100% sure on, but could check, is whether assessors are required to look back at existing assessments on solar and other renewable energy arrays and adjust them. And in essence, it kind of forces the result of a cert, or if it's just forward-looking for projects coming online, and the burden is on existing developers to say, hey, wake up, without filing a cert. I'm not exactly sure how that mechanism is intended to work.
Well, as I would just say, as assessments are of an annual determination under the real property tax law, I think it's going to be mandatory for the assessors to use that on existing projects. But I haven't seen anything to change that in the law, but I doubt the state would penalize those that were done first and give the golden handshake to the ones that are going forward.
Right.
So, I mean, if it was me as an assessor, I'd use the formula and lower it because all you're gonna do is guarantee yourself a cert. And these aren't gonna be inexpensive reviews to do in the courts, that's for sure. So those changes are coming.
So Paul, earlier when I came in, you were talking with Bill before the meeting. So that would come to, what did you say the tax would come to, 8,000 for that project?
Well, I guess we gotta go back. Full taxation, my concern has always been that this new model would come up with a valuation that puts it less than our pilot is. So by law, we can't have a pilot that exceeds what would have normally been taxed had it not been exempt through the pilot. So my concern was that with the new valuation, come up with a full taxable value that generates a $4,000 tax bill, and all of a sudden our pilot is exceeding full taxation.
Yeah.
If they get a community credit, like we plugged in from the information Bill got, it doesn't look like we have that problem. But they're going to be assessed at like 65 to 70% of full value. Their pilot will equate to like 65% of full value or a 35% abatement.
All right. So I guess, I mean, well, I guess it doesn't really require any changes to our UTEP currently. I mean, it's still just said per megawatts. I mean, how we get there is outside of the UTEP itself. So.
All right.
I initially thought changing to an assessment-based pilot with an exempt percentage would make sense, but who knows what the state, they're going to reestablish this model every year. Okay? What's to say the state doesn't give them another win like they did this year when they removed the renewable energy credit revenue and the strike price revenue from the calculations. I mean, that brought down the projected value of these projects dramatically. So who knows what they're going to do next year with this model?
I guess we're probably all right leaving it as it is for now.
Yes, and this goes into effect January, is it January 1 this goes into effect?
Well, it goes into effect for the March 1st taxable
For the
status
taxable
date in
status.
2022, but the law's in effect now.
So I guess our next pilot application will start using this value and maybe look at that percentage abatement and see what comes up with. We'll have to kind of play around when the next one comes in. Right?
I think the one thing we need to do, I sent it out earlier, I think we have to have some additional information we demand to be able to do this at the time of application, and that may be something we talk about. we currently don't ask, okay, do you get a community credit for your project?
No, right.
We're gonna need to know whether if it's a VD, a distributed energy project, we're gonna have to know whether they get a community adder or this community credit. And if it's a tier 1 project, at least you can find out information on NYSERDA and send us to them online.
And those values exist on this website that National Grid provided me, but they will not tell us without an authorization letter from the developer what they actually have been given. I mean, this is the monthly value, so we can, if we knew which one it was, we could plug it in, but there's no way of finding that out without the developer giving it to us or without the developer telling National Grid it's all right for us to see that value.
So they have rough numbers, but they don't have project-specific numbers, you're saying.
Correct.
See, on the tier 1 projects, they have the actual numbers by project, so that's a little different.
Well, we can always, I mean,
One,
We can always.
getting back to the model, the one unknown is how assessors handle the land value. You know,
That's a topic that we need to, I think, discuss and try to get to a uniform approach throughout the county.
my initial thought is if it's leased, value it with the lease, then value it without the lease, and you can extrapolate out what the model would generate for a land value. But the difference is your discount rate is probably different for vacant for land than it is for the project. So
How would you get a copy of the lease value without a lot of arm turning?
demand it from the developer before we consider their application.
Okay.
Yeah, as part of our closing process, we require a copy of the ground lease. More often than not, they'll redact the actual rentals. In some of the other terms, they're a little aggressive with that, but generally speaking, from a mechanical perspective, if you have, just using a hypothetical project, 100 acres of either fallow or active farmland or just vacant land, and 30 of it is going to be utilized and is leased for a commercial solar project. The assessor has an existing tax parcel with either an agriculturally assessed value or partially exempt ag value, be it what it is. The 30-acre parcel generally is recognized and treated as what's called a suffix or stub parcel by the assessor. Taking the IDA out of it, they'll generally identify that leased area as commercial property at that point and assign what they identify as a reasonable value on the commercial land, as opposed to the balance of 70 acres that may be continued to be utilized as agricultural or just vacant. The issue here is that oftentimes, and under 487, there's sometimes a little bit different treatment. The assessed value, there should be an assessed value assigned to the land that's different from the ongoing or historical agricultural or vacant assessment. It isn't necessarily fair to let the land value sit with the master tax parcel and require the landowner, the farmer or whoever, to pay 70% agricultural or vacant, and then 30% of a higher commercial value. It's better to let the assessor identify that 30 acres with a land value and an improvements value that, if it's taxable without a pilot, the developer would pick up as the entity controlling that parcel. And if there is a pilot, our pilot lays over exactly that 30 acres. Our exemption literally sits on the lease of that land, and the IDA's ability to exempt that property and provide a pilot payment and pilot agreement is because we have a leasehold interest in that land, and the improvements are built on that. So, in the way that the UTEP was drafted, the prior version and the current version, states that there will be a fixed dollar amount per megawatt provided with flexibility to identify what that may be. You're sitting at 5,500 right now. You have the ability to go up with inflation or adjust over time. And full taxes should be paid on that land value as a component of the pilot agreement. That's fair in a number of ways. The farmer isn't required to pay extra taxes on a commercial thing that is sitting on their property and then charge it back to the developer. The farmer is simply paying what he owes on the 70 acres. The developer, whether through normal taxes or through a pilot agreement, is paying the land value that's commercial, plus under the pilot an abated amount that's fixed dollar, and they get hit with special district charges. That's fair in a number of ways because the farmer isn't penalized and charging it back to the developer. And the taxing jurisdictions are also seeing a continuity of taxes on the agricultural land, and they're seeing the upside of a commercial assessment on the development parcel, plus the pilot revenue that's realized for the improvements. There's some mechanical things that I want to go through with you on prior projects and forward-looking projects to avoid situations where if the farmer is forced to pay an increased amount of taxes on his land because of the hosting of a commercial solar array, and under his ground lease with the developer, he's charging that back. The developer, in essence, is paying those taxes under the ground lease and potentially crediting or asking you for a credit for that, as opposed to simply paying it, which is consistent with your UTEP. We're trying to institute, and in talking with Dave and others, a uniform standard for how this is approached. We've had some preliminary conversations with the County Office of Real Property Services on how they can play a role in helping to establish uniformity throughout the county, because every assessor is different. You have, perhaps a dozen towns, and you may have, a dozen different opinions on the matter, or a dozen different approaches. That could result in pilot mechanics and billing that is pretty different throughout the county. It'll be helpful to try to come up with a standard where if an assessor is going to establish a stub parcel for one of these projects, which they should, it should have a component valuation for land as commercial assessed, and whatever they think is appropriate at this point for the improvements value. As we've talked at great length, that improvements value is going to be tempered now with the discount to cash approach. But those two metrics, land value and the forward-looking improvements value, are really important components for establishment and administration of the pilot agreement itself. We need a land value to bill, and then whatever the per megawatt charge on top of that is really what invoicing should go out and what kind of remittance should come back for distribution to the taxing jurisdictions. We had a glut of these things go out in the last 18 to 24 months, and we're going to have more coming online in the near future. The challenge is trying to make those all look and be handled from an administrative perspective consistently, so all the developers are getting the same kind of bills and have the same obligations under their contracts.
Just to clarify something you said earlier. So say the developer is leasing 60 acres, but the project is on 30 acres. We're collecting on the land value of the full 60, right? Or just
Really no.
Yeah.
Well, what you'll see is there will be parity or some matching. They're going to lease 60 acres or build on 60 acres, or what you'll see in some instances now, what I'm noticing is that if they are leasing significantly more acreage than their initial installation sits on, what they're waiting for is regional or more local interconnect capacity. And they're going to just start doubling. Once they can get to it, they're going to start doubling these arrays. Oftentimes what you're seeing is the first of what they think is a component or integral build out of an array, and it's all throttled by interconnect. So that's something to keep an eye on. A lot of these projects are just component A of what they hope to stamp out on more.
But in the meantime, are we looking at full land value differently for the 30 acres under the project and the 30 they're leasing that doesn't have arrays located on it?
If it's leased for commercial purposes from the landowner, it
The whole
should be
thing.
treated by the assessor
Right.
from the fallow land.
Right.
And the assessors should have an understanding. And quite frankly, I've gotten to the point now where when we send the 412A applications, because it's part of our job, to each of the assessors in the taxing jurisdictions, we're including a survey and the property description, so they can basically establish on the rolls an accurate subtax parcel or suffix or stub parcel that fits the actual lease. What we're dealing with now, there's a couple of projects, and Dave's certainly aware. There were 2 OYA projects that are, and there's some confusions on who is OYA.
Yeah.
You have a bundle of projects that are called OYA. There's 4 of them in particular that are actually controlled and owned for beneficial purposes by Nextera, a very large concern. You have some other ones that are called OYA as well that are still owned by a Canadian company out of Toronto called OYA. It's confusing as heck, but the 2 OYAs that closed earlier this year in April are now coming back to us and saying, oh, well, we closed this transaction with you, one in particular that involves 154 acres. By the by, we only leased 35. We dialed down our leasehold area to 35 acres because that's all we really need, and that's all we're leasing right now. We need to amend the entire IDA transaction. We just got that letter a couple of weeks ago. And just because many of you are on the actual IDA board, that's coming to you December 2nd to trim back this 154 acre thing to 35. So we need to go in and do an omnibus amendment to the lease back the pilot, and tell the assessor, oh, by the way, even though a 412A application was filed, not too long ago for 100 acres, we only want you to exempt 35. So it's we have a little bit of an exercise to get through for those 2 projects before the end of the year. It's good that they're trimming back and we're not taking all of that land off the rolls, only the 35, and the installation is going to be located within that 35. But if I were to guess, that lease may get amended not too far down the road, a few years or perhaps 5 years, when interconnect and capacity in the grid is bumped up. They're going to start, it's like Legos, they're going to keep building around these things and making larger arrays. So that's just my guess and my prediction, but I think it's a logical way for them to start building out. They're getting into areas that are easily developed, very low impact in terms of site plan. Sometimes they will look for areas that don't even have a site plan law. And start there, and then they have favorable interconnects nearby 35 kV or above, and that's where they're going to locate. And they're going to start building larger arrays and incrementally larger arrays. What you're already seeing in the OYA controlled by Nextera and others, where they have a bundle of projects that are around 5 megawatts apiece. You put those 4 together and you've got a 20. They didn't have to go through the state process. They just went through the local process, which is faster. So it's the sum of the parts is what you're seeing. And I think those will continue to grow, which is consistent with the state's renewable energy goals. And it's consistent with deploying green energy. But what you're seeing as an agency is you're in the middle of that exponential growth. And I think it's going to continue.
Yeah, I disagree with your comment on the farmers. These farmers are making $2 leasing the land. So the value of that underlying land is the value to the farmer, not to the project. So if I went to sell my leasehold interest with the underlying fee owner, I'm going to sell that income stream.
Yep.
Okay. So the value of the land to the farmer is a lot more than as commercial than it is for agriculture. And to say we're protecting the farmer should have thought of all this, or the underlying landowner should have thought of this at the time they did the lease, that they're going to have to be reimbursed for the value, because the value, if I had a 60-acre parcel and I wanted to move to Florida and sell that income stream, I'm going to sell that income stream, and that's value to the underlying landowner. too. So that's one thing. The second thing is in Jefferson County, I can tell you from practice, when I was there, suffix parcels traditionally have zero land value and only the improvements are on the suffix parcel. If there's a change in the land value, it goes on the underlying land value. And that has a lot to do with concerns over if there's ever a tax enforcement issue. Because with a suffix parcel, you get a tax lien for nothing. And in fact, the pilot is in a lien against anything on the project. The tax lien. So another thing,
I agree with you in philosophy, but what's occurring is the IDA is exempting that land. That's the interest we have. We have a ground lease, a sub-ground leasehold interest that is exempted. So if that value spikes, the underlying value, that the concept is that the developer under the pilot should be paying whatever land tax is there.
that should have been taken care of at the time that they negotiated the lease with the underlying, with the owner of the property, that they're gonna make the owner of the property whole for any increase in taxes. Isn't that a standard in most of the leases? In the ones we saw for a wind farm that was there.
That's correct. And they're also getting, the developers are also forced to absorb any penalties that are imposed for the loss of the agricultural exemption, which is,
Well,
uh,
in New York State, it's up to the assessor to determine how they appear on the roll anyhow. It's not up to us to tell them how to do it. We can suggest it, but it's gonna come down to the assessors in the county. So, we have 300 suffix parcels in the town of Orleans. None of them have land value on them. Okay? And I'm trying to think, I know in Lewis County, they put a land value on the land underneath the wind turbines. That's the only place I know that that's occurred locally that I've seen, so.
but the UTEP, the UTEP says we don't accept we don't provide an abatement on the land value, the developer is required to pay it. So in the absence of having a metric, a land value assigned under the suffix parcel, Lyle and just the agency in general is kind of hamstrung on trying to build a thing out consistent with the UTEP. So that's one of the reasons why I think if, to the extent that we can extrapolate one and assign a value. I don't know. To the extent that it is commercial assessed, all of a sudden the farmer's paying, and then billing it back under the pilot, but the farmer's paying those taxes in the first instance. And if the developer doesn't put them under the lease, tension there, I think, but.
Okay, so some of these, let's assume they're getting, from the stuff I've seen, it's between $1,000 and $1,500 an acre traditionally, about 5 to 7 a megawatt. So they're going to be making, in the instance of a 30-acre lease, 30 grand a year. Okay, but, when you do an income approach to value on that land, of that 30 grand, maybe 6 of the 30,000 might be property taxes, if that much. So they're going to have an income stream to pay those taxes in the first instance. And if we ever have a project that fails and they don't pay the property, and the developer doesn't pay the land tax, we don't have a lien against anything until we get it back on the roll after we withdraw the pilot. That's my concern. And Dave probably remembers we had huge discussions about a wind farm and tax enforcement. So I'm just concerned with the number of projects we have. The likelihood that one may fail over the next 30 years is probably not bad. I don't see them all failing, but.
Yeah, the projects that we're closing now, and I know it's forward looking, but we're requiring a pilot mortgage on every project, whether it's Roth, whether it's Renzi, or any dozen of the solar projects launching. We require them to sign a pilot mortgage that is a lien on the project, land and improvements. It's the leasehold in the land, but what that does is it primes the mortgage in your favor for unpaid pilot payments. And you're the mortgagee for yourself and on behalf of the taxing jurisdictions. So if they don't pay, you've got a lien that primes and keeps going. And if you're forced to terminate the lease back and place it back on the rolls, you're still holding that lien until it's satisfied.
Yeah, but it's not a lien against the underlying property owner. Is it, or is he required to sign the pilot mortgage?
He's not signing it on the fee interest. We do require an attornment agreement where they acknowledge the fact that their property, the leasehold interest, is being affected by an IDA pilot mortgage. So they're acknowledging it, but we're never going to be able to take the land, and that's not our intent. What we have is
It should be the taxing jurisdiction's intent to take the land should they not pay their taxes. Okay, so let's assume we have a pilot mortgage on a project and we take title to the project. That means the taxing jurisdictions or whoever takes title to the project's got to pay that lease.
they would step into the shoes of the ground lease. That's what they would take. Again, we're the lien holder on their behalf, so we have discretion. And it kind of goes back to bifurcating the land value. The farmer's going to keep his taxes current, but if his tenant doesn't, that's up to the tenant to screw up. At least we protect it. If the land value is paid under the pilot, we have a lien on that amount of land value.
Okay, can I ask you a question? Do we have the ability to force decommissioning should they default on let's assume a project fails and we have to call the provisions of the project mortgage. Can that trigger a decommissioning?
Well, our first inclination is going to be to cleave the lease back and terminate the pilot, yet hold on to the lien, which allows us to, in some degrees, control what's going on with the ground lease itself. That's what we have a lien on, and the improvements. If the developer were to completely divorce himself and walk away, there may be continuing obligations or things to address for decommissioning. The more likely situation is that the developer's lender, whoever's got liens on the project or even a traditional mortgage, they're going to cure. They're going to want to try to blow the developer out and bring in a new owner. So there's always going to be a lender interest to cure and solve the problem because they have a vested interest and money on the table in the project, the improvements. Yeah, I would hope that the IDA is never actually holding on to one of these projects, trying to collect, what in comparison is a relatively small amount of back pilot payments that weren't paid. But it's hard to say.
That's kind of funny when we were dealing with Galoo, Dave, if you recall, there was big pushback from the developer on the concept of a pilot mortgage.
Yeah, I worked on it. I remember.
And now you know why. I was
Okay.
gonna ask a question with all of the commentary is good. So just so I can understand it a little bit better, if the underlying land with no improvements whatsoever is valued by a local assessor is $300 an acre, some number. And now you create these little couple hundred yard by a couple hundred yard suffix parcels or whatever. And now it's maybe $1,500 an acre. Wouldn't that increase in revenue to the business that is leasing the land really be taken up in their income taxes? I know it's not land taxes per se, but so your question is, Paul, how do we get that little piece underneath the real property improvement increased to collect land value tax on its increase, or is it really just truly the real property? Because the land's the land. Once it's decommissioned, it's still $300 an acre. So isn't it truly only the real property improvement and not the physical tangible land? And then should we really not care because the farmer, if they're playing by the rules, or any landowner, any increase in income is going to have to be reported on their income tax with basically no offsetting cost. So they're just going to have to pay much higher taxes. I mean, that's the way I look at it. Maybe I'm looking at it obtusely or wrongly, but that's kind of the way I look at it.
Well, I look at it that the higher taxes come to local jurisdictions where the federal and state income tax is not under local control.
I agree with you, and I wish there were a way to keep some locally, but, I mean, even their state income tax will go a little bit. I know a little bit of that will flow back to the localities through the county, but if somebody gets a benefit of collecting a revenue stream, and again, they're playing by the rules and disclose it, they really have no offsetting costs. If they collect $30,000 a year, they're gonna have to pay taxes on $30,000 a year, probably a pretty high tax rate. I'm guessing.
It's really a function of recognizing something as commercial as opposed to vacant or for agricultural.
Absolutely.
So is our simple thing to take the whole parcel at whatever the assessor has previously valued the land at? Is that a simplistic approach, and then forget about all the suffix parcel and stuff other than the legality of it, and deal with the real property improvements and assume the underlying land will at some point not be commercial? Again, it'll basically be farmland or whatever, cropland or wooded lots, or, you know, in time, it'll be something else.
To the extent that one of these projects runs a life cycle and is actually decommissioned, and they actually pull the foundations out of the ground and the thing goes away, the assessor might just retire the suffix parcel, and then you're back to one master parcel assessed at ag. We don't know.
If an income stream goes away and it is assessed to the land, so does the value associated with the income stream. So if a project goes away, they're gonna have to lower the assessment to what its current use is. And especially if it goes back to agriculture, because in New York State, you're required to value agriculture in use, and it's used for agriculture. So they would be forced to return it back to its previous value at whatever it's worth at that period in time for that use. So.
What we're also seeing is, and I call it, I tend to be glib, but I call it being pooped by half. But you see some of these developers out there running a gang of sheep through it once a year just to maintain the land at ag. There's been plans at the planning board level. I don't know if they've been deployed yet. They're trying to trigger an agricultural exemption on the underlying land and fight against the commercial assessment under the array.
The state has already opined against that. Running sheep in the inside of an array doesn't make it eligible for an agricultural value assessment.
Yeah,
There's a recent opinion of council out about that.
and I guess I
In fact, I think
feel.
Jay even got that from, we've all received in an email from Jay that he did the research, and that was what he got back from the Office of Real Property Taxation.
We were on top of it.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as far as I'm concerned, running sheep is just a scam to buy, oh, look, they're running, it's more of a look at us than it is a reality and a way of maintaining the property.
And as we debated before, if we take an approach where whatever the land's valued at is valued at, let's say it's $300 an acre, I don't think we should really care about if there's ag exemptions and all that other stuff. That's a locality issue. If a locality wants to grant them, that's great. Doesn't mean we have to consider them. I don't think these things have dual use. I mean, you can't consider it to be both a farm and a commercial site. It's one or the other.
I would prefer they'd have to hire a human being to maintain the grass levels than this.
Yeah, but don't even give somebody a loophole to go around. They'll hire some 16-year-old kids to weed whack around stuff and call it a day. I mean, it really is. It's one thing or the other. It can't be both.
Justin, do we want to go into executive section to talk about some issues with the other?
Yeah, there's a motion made to go into executive session to receive advice of counsel. we could go in and talk about some technical issues that we're dealing on a legal level on a couple of projects.
I'll make the motion to enter
For a second,
executive session to get advice of counsel.
second, anybody?
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
All right.
Okay. We're in the
Recording
executive-
stopped.